When I moved to Riverton Estates, I was drawn to the manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and picturesque homes that seemed to promise a life free from the chaos of my job. Officially, I was just another homeowner relocating from out of state, unremarkable in every way. Unofficially, I was a Special Operations Commander for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF. For years, my work had thrust me into the underworld of illegal weapons. I needed a break. A quiet suburb like Riverton Estates felt like an oasis. Most neighbors introduced themselves with genuine warmth, offering baked goods or helpful tips about local services. They mentioned the Homeowners Association, HOA, a typical suburban entity that enforced rules about lawn height and approved mailbox designs. At first, I expected nothing unusual. Then I heard about the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, Andrea Whittington, widely known by her unflattering nickname, Karen. Karen was in her early 50s, with short, meticulously styled hair, a posture of rigid authority, and an attitude that dripped with condescension. Rumor had it she made life miserable for those who violated even minor HOA regulations. She prowled the streets in a crisp blouse and beige slacks, clipboard in hand, making notes of petty infractions, an unedged lawn, a fence that needed repainting, a dog that barked too loud. Residents tried to stay on her good side by adhering to the rules, but her demands grew more intrusive by the month. While I found her behavior over the top, it didn't immediately strike me as illegal. Riverton Estates seemed peaceful, an unlikely setting for serious crimes. I had no inkling that Karen would soon reveal herself as more than just a bossy HOA member. In the hidden corners of her spacious garage, something far darker was unfolding. On my third day in Riverton Estates, I was cleaning out the moving boxes in my driveway when Karen appeared, stepping carefully across the sidewalk in her wedge shoes. She stopped in front of me, scanning the half-unpacked boxes with disapproval. "You're new here," she said. "I'm Andrea Whittington, Vice Chair of the HOA Enforcement Committee, though many folks just call me Karen." She gave me a thin smile. "I'd like to remind you that all moving materials must be stored out of sight by 7 p.m., as per Riverton Estates Bylaw Section 3.4. I nodded politely. "I'll make sure to have them cleared by tonight." Karen's eyes traveled over the boxes and my open garage. "Yes. Well, we must maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic. I see you've kept the lawn trimmed, which is a good start. Let's keep it that way." She turned on her heel and marched off, leaving me with the impression that she fancied herself a minor dictator. Still, I shrugged it off as typical HOA zeal. Little did I know that beneath her veneer of petty rule enforcement, she harbored a much more dangerous secret. That evening, after I'd tidied up, I took a walk around the block. From a distance, I noticed Karen's house, a large two-story with an impressive flower bed. Her garage door was closed, but a faint light shone from inside. It struck me as odd. Who worked in their garage late into the night with the door down? Perhaps she was a hobbyist or simply reorganizing clutter. I dismissed it as none of my business. If only I had known what was really going on behind those walls. A few weeks into my new life at Riverton Estates, I picked up on subtle oddities about Karen. She often had late-night visitors, usually men driving vans or pickup trucks. They stayed briefly, sometimes just long enough to unload or load something in her garage. I might have overlooked it if it happened once or twice, but this became a recurring pattern, always after dusk. One night, while walking my Labrador, I observed a dark SUV idling by her curb. A tall figure got out, glanced around, and then rolled up the garage door by remote. I caught a glimpse of large crates stacked in rows. My instincts from years of ATF work flared. That's exactly how contraband shipments are often stored before distribution. But I wasn't certain. It could have been furniture or bulk purchases. The next morning, Karen was patrolling the street, complaining about a neighbor's inappropriately colored shutters. She paused to greet me with her usual stiff courtesy, asking if I was settling in well. I said yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling she was sizing me up. Her eyes flicked over me, perhaps searching for a hint that I'd noticed something last night. But I kept my face neutral. Over the following days, I remained watchful. I saw the same pattern: sporadic visits, nighttime deliveries, the garage light glowing after 10 p.m. My ATF training told me something was off, yet I had no probable cause to suspect a crime. If I reported this to the local police, they'd ask for specifics. Suspicious deliveries at odd hours alone isn't enough to launch an investigation. Still, I knew from experience that illegal arms traffickers often choose quiet suburbs to avoid suspicion. The repetitive drop-off, pick-up, pattern matched known methods used by small-scale traffickers. Could Karen be involved in that? She seemed more obsessed with yard maintenance than firearms. But criminals come in all guises. To gather more information, I decided to maintain my cover, a friendly, cooperative neighbor, and watch from the shadows. If Karen truly was up to something dangerous, she'd eventually slip up. One afternoon, I drove downtown to the local hardware store, hoping to find supplies to complete some home repairs. After I paid for my items, I noticed Karen in a far aisle. She was loading her cart with large plastic bins, locks, and industrial-grade shelves. Odd items for typical home organizing, but still not illegal. Trying not to be seen, I observed her at the checkout. She paid in cash, waved off the receipt, and quickly exited. Outside, I caught a glimpse of her license plate as she sped away. As an ATF operative, I had the resources to run the plate discreetly. I did so that evening, only to find it was registered in her name, no red flags there. But I also discovered that the VIN attached to her vehicle had been purchased just 6 months earlier, after she'd already been living in Riverton Estates for years. Why switch vehicles so suddenly? That alone wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but my intuition said she was deliberately avoiding a paper trail. People engaged in clandestine activities often change vehicles to stay under the radar. Still, no direct evidence existed yet. Meanwhile, life in the neighborhood remained outwardly calm. The weekly HOA bulletins arrived in my mailbox with Karen's byline, full of petty admonitions about lawn decorations and noise limits. At community gatherings, she was a picture of suburban politeness, praising the association's rules while subtly reminding everyone of potential fines for noncompliance. I could see how some neighbors found comfort in her strict order. But from my vantage point, trained to detect deeper patterns, Karen's control seemed like a smokescreen. She delighted in weaving a net of minor regulations, keeping everyone so occupied with compliance that they'd never think to question her own activities. I resolved to keep peeling back the layers, hoping to catch a glimpse of her real agenda. Curiosity turned into mild obsession. As my suspicion grew, I became more systematic in watching Karen's house. Without tipping her off, I installed a discreet camera in my upstairs window, angled to capture her driveway. If any vehicles came late at night, I wanted a record. The camera footage revealed a steady trickle of visitors. Men, occasionally women, all arriving in unmarked vans or pickups. They parked on Karen's driveway or curb, loaded or unloaded small crates, then left within 15 minutes. Often, Karen would stand by, clipboard in hand, scanning barcodes or scribbling notes. That was my first solid sign that these shipments might contain actual goods, possibly contraband. No typical homeowner invests in scanning equipment or logs each crate meticulously. One night, I caught a break. My camera recorded a visitor dropping a crate, causing it to crack open on one corner. For a split second, a metal object clanked onto Karen's driveway before she rushed to pick it up. I couldn't see the item in detail, but it looked suspiciously like the muzzle of a firearm. My heart pounded as the visitor and Karen quickly resealed the crate and carried it into the garage. I replayed that clip multiple times, freeze framing. I was about 80% certain I'd seen the barrel of a rifle. This changed everything. If Karen was storing firearms, it wasn't necessarily a crime, unless she was dealing without a license or trafficking banned weapons. But the secrecy, the late-night timing, and the hush-hush nature of these transactions strongly suggested illegal arms dealing. At last, I had a potential lead that could warrant a deeper investigation. However, the ATF has strict protocols. If I launched an official inquiry without more evidence, it could tip Karen off. She might flee or destroy any proof. So, I decided to gather more intelligence quietly, hoping to catch her red-handed. For now, my mission was clandestine. Act like an unsuspecting neighbor while collecting definitive proof. In early spring, Riverton Estates hosted its monthly HOA meeting in the community center. The usual topics included landscaping plans, security cameras at the entrance, and scheduling the annual neighborhood barbecue. Karen presided over the session in place of the nominal HOA president, an older man who seemed too timid to challenge her. Her authoritarian style was on full display. She demanded that everyone adopt uniform mailboxes, threatened fines for houses that had more than 2 unapproved lawn ornaments, and insisted that all front doors be painted in a narrow range of earth-tone colors. Some residents openly bristled, but no one dared speak up, except for a few who asked polite questions. When the discussion reached new business, a concerned neighbor named Ms. Calloway raised her hand and mentioned seeing suspicious vehicles at odd hours near Karen's house. She phrased it gently, but Karen's reaction was immediate and furious. "How dare you imply wrongdoing?" Karen snapped, glaring at Ms. Calloway. "I conduct legitimate business from home, consulting and courier services. Perhaps if you spent more time following our HOA guidelines and less time snooping, you'd know that." The tension in the room was palpable. Ms. Calloway shrank back in her seat. Karen launched into a tirade about how certain individuals were trying to disrupt the community's harmony. She threatened to form a new compliance committee with broader enforcement powers. The mild-mannered HOA president merely cleared his throat, offered no pushback, and moved on to the next agenda item. I watched this unfold, hiding my annoyance. Karen's rage at a simple question about her late-night deliveries hinted at guilt. She was used to controlling the narrative, browbeating neighbors into silence. But Ms. Calloway's question had let me see Karen's vulnerability. She was rattled, and rattled suspects sometimes make mistakes. After the meeting, I stepped outside, feigning a phone call so I could linger unseen. Karen emerged, fuming to herself. She made a brief call on her cell phone, her voice tight and urgent. I caught fragments. "We have to speed up the next shipments. Getting suspicious," she lowered her voice, then hopped into her car and drove off. So she planned to accelerate her operations. That might mean more deliveries, more movement, an opportunity for me to catch her in a bigger slip-up. I returned home and pored over the camera footage from the prior weeks, looking for patterns, days, times, types of vehicles. A few brand names on the crates were visible. They were mostly nondescript codes, though I recognized one fake label a known trafficker once used. That strongly reinforced the arms trafficking angle. Still, to trigger an official ATF sting, I needed more direct evidence. A purchase, a storage location, or a testimony from a co-conspirator. My best chance was if Karen tried to involve me. But why would she do that? She knew nothing of my real identity. All she saw was a neighbor who kept to himself. However, arms dealers sometimes prefer to deal within their community, trusting that no one would suspect a regular suburban neighbor. If she saw me as a potential buyer, that might open a path. The next day, I casually mentioned at the community mailbox station that I worked in security consulting. I made sure Karen overheard me referencing connections to potential clients who buy specialized equipment. She pretended not to notice, but I saw her ears perk up. It was a gamble. Maybe she'd see me as competition or as an opportunity. Either way, it might prompt a conversation that could expose her operation. My small ploy paid off faster than expected. Within a week, Karen approached me in my driveway. She wore a guarded expression, speaking in a subdued tone. "I heard you work in security consulting," she began. "Mind if I ask about that? I'm exploring side ventures." I feigned mild curiosity. "Sure, I help with risk assessments, physical security, that sort of thing. Are you looking for personal protection solutions?" Karen hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was in earshot. "Something like that. I have contacts who deal in specialized equipment. I wondered if you might have leads on clients who need high-grade gear." My heart thumped. This was precisely the conversation I hoped for. "Maybe," I said casually. "What kind of gear?" She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "Some are older collectibles, others are brand new, top tier. Firearms, suppressors, attachments, perfect for serious security professionals. Strictly legal, if you have the right paperwork." She was giving me an opening, a coded invitation to buy or broker illegal arms. "I know some folks who might be interested," I replied, playing along. "But they usually want to verify authenticity and avoid red tape." Karen's eyes gleamed. "That can be arranged. Look, we can't talk about this openly. Let's continue this conversation somewhere private." I agreed to meet her at a local cafe the next day, feigning eagerness. My mind raced with excitement and caution. If Karen believed I was a viable buyer or liaison, she might show me her stash or reveal how she circumvented licensing. That would be the evidence I needed to bring the ATF's resources down on her. At a small cafe on the edge of town, Karen arrived wearing a tidy blazer, her posture tense. We took a table in a quiet corner. Over coffee, she asked me about the nature of my security clients, how discreet they were, whether they'd pay in cash. I dropped careful hints about wealthy private collectors, paramilitary groups, and foreign buyers. Anything to see how far Karen was willing to go. Her eyes lit up. I have suppliers who can get almost anything, she boasted. Handguns, rifles, attachments, some untraceable. I can handle the inventory right from my home workshop. She spoke as though it was a small side hustle, but the scale seemed large. I probed carefully, asking if she had any formal licenses. She laughed dismissively. Licenses? Please. The system's rigged. I operate under the radar. My buyers prefer anonymity. I keep everything off the books. That was it. The clear admission that she was illegally trafficking firearms. She offered to show me samples if I proved I was serious. I nodded, playing the role of a cautious but interested potential buyer. You'll need to see a taste of what I can provide, she said. But no cameras, no phones. You understand. Her brazen confidence was staggering. But it confirmed everything. Riverton Estates' controlling HOA enforcer was running a clandestine arms ring. This knowledge weighed heavily on me, though it also meant I was one step closer to shutting her down. Once she gave me physical evidence, a demonstration of those weapons, I could coordinate a sting. We agreed to meet in her garage the following weekend, where she'd show me select items. I forced a casual smile, masking the adrenaline coursing through me. If all went according to plan, that meeting would be the beginning of her downfall. Back at my house, I contacted my ATF superiors through secure channels. The conversation was tense. My boss demanded to know how a suburban HOA rep was dealing arms so openly. I explained the entire background and shared the camera footage of crates, the muffled audio from the cafe, recorded by a hidden device in my sleeve, and my notes on her operation. The agency greenlit a covert sting operation. We codenamed it Operation Garden Gate, a nod to the suburban setting. A small team from Special Operations would deploy near Riverton Estates at the designated time. I was to meet Karen in her garage, inspect the merchandise, and give a signal once I confirmed the presence of illegal firearms. Then, a tactical team would move in. The challenge was ensuring minimal risk to innocent neighbors. Karen's property was deep inside the cul-de-sac, surrounded by other homes. We planned carefully to avoid a drawn-out standoff or a firefight. Our best chance was to catch Karen off guard, away from bystanders. After all, she might have firearms within reach. The weekend arrived. I woke early on Saturday, tension knotting my stomach. In the afternoon, I strolled casually to Karen's house, wearing a hidden camera and microphone. 2 ATF vans, disguised as delivery vehicles, parked nearby. Another unmarked SUV containing armed agents lingered in a neighbor's driveway with permission. We were ready, or so I hoped. At precisely 2 p.m., I rapped on Karen's door. She answered with a forced smile, her eyes darting suspiciously up and down the street. Come around the side, she whispered, leading me through a gate to her backyard and then into the garage through a side entrance. Inside, it was surprisingly organized, with shelves lining the walls. Stacks of boxes, crates, and locked trunks spread across the floor. She closed the door behind us. All right, let me show you a few items that might interest your, clients. From one locked steel cabinet, she pulled out a compact submachine gun. My pulse pounded. She demonstrated how the folding stock worked, handing it to me as though she were a legitimate firearms dealer. Then she unlocked a crate labeled Auto Parts to reveal an array of handguns, carefully arranged with magazines. Another crate contained high-powered rifles, some with serial numbers scratched off. The quantity stunned me. Dozens of weapons in just a small corner of the garage. If that was only some of her inventory, the full scope of her operation might be massive. Karen rattled off specs. 9mm with a custom trigger job, .45 with a silencer option, extended mags. She was clearly knowledgeable, using jargon commonly heard in illicit arms deals. I feigned interest, checking the hidden camera pinned under my jacket lapel. My live feed transmitted to the ATF vans outside. They had more than enough evidence now, but I wanted a direct admission on the record. These are nice, I said. No paperwork needed, right? Karen snorted. Paperwork? You must be joking. Cash only. No background checks. Nothing that can trace back to me. That sealed the deal. I gently placed the submachine gun down, exhaling a steadying breath. The next step was to give the green light to our team. I pressed a button on my watch, sending a silent signal. Moments later, we heard the rumble of vehicles pulling up outside. Karen frowned at the noise. "Expecting anyone?" she asked sharply. I shrugged nonchalantly. "Not me." Before she could react, we heard a series of loud bangs on the front door. A voice boomed, "Federal agents. Open up." Simultaneously, the side door leading from the backyard was kicked in by an ATF entry team. Armed agents in tactical gear flooded the garage, shouting, "Hands where we can see them." Karen's eyes bulged in shock. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a crate. In that moment, I revealed my credentials, pulling out my badge. "I'm ATF Special Operations Commander. You're under arrest for illegal arms trafficking." For an instant, Karen seemed too stunned to respond. Then her face twisted with rage. She reached for a pistol on a nearby shelf, but an agent tackled her before she could grab it. She screamed protests as they pinned her to the ground, cuffing her wrists behind her back. The panic in her eyes told me she grasped the enormity of her mistake. Her entire operation had been laid bare. Outside, more agents secured the perimeter, guns trained on any potential accomplices. They quickly stormed through the house, searching for additional caches of weapons or documents. Within minutes, Karen's property was swarming with federal law enforcement, leaving her humiliated and powerless on her own garage floor. My heart pounded from the adrenaline, but a deep sense of relief washed over me. We had seized a dangerous arsenal that might otherwise flood the streets. And we'd done so without any shots fired, a best-case scenario in a high-risk sting. The sound of sirens and commotion drew out half the neighborhood. They stood on lawns and sidewalks, watching in amazement as federal agents carried box after box of firearms from Karen's garage. Word spread rapidly. The tyrannical HOA enforcer had been running an illegal arms operation. Whispers of, "I knew something was off, and she always had so many strange visitors," rippled through the crowd. Miss Calloway, the neighbor who'd questioned Karen's late-night deliveries, seemed both vindicated and fearful. She told a local reporter, "I suspected something, but I never imagined it was guns." Another neighbor expressed relief that the ATF had intervened before any violence spilled over. Meanwhile, the HOA president was in tears, apologizing to neighbors for not reigning in Karen's authority. He admitted he had no idea of her secret dealings and felt responsible for letting her dominate the neighborhood unchallenged. People consoled him, acknowledging that Karen's manipulative intimidation had deceived them all. For my part, I briefly addressed a few concerned residents. I explained that we had uncovered serious criminal activity involving firearms trafficking, and that we would provide updates once the legal process took its course. Many stared at me with a mix of gratitude and astonishment. The quiet new neighbor was actually an ATF commander who had orchestrated a raid right under their noses. Once the operation concluded, Karen was transported to a federal holding facility. Agents cataloged the seized weapons: rifles, pistols, submachine guns, silencers, extended magazines, even grenades that might have been in Note or Live. We'd have to test. The scope of her inventory suggested a major pipeline, possibly linked to smuggling networks across state or international lines. Under interrogation, Karen initially refused to speak, demanding a lawyer. Her arrogance had evaporated, replaced by sullen defiance. Investigators began tracing her finances, uncovering secret bank accounts and suspicious transactions. It looked like she'd been in business for over a year, using Riverton Estates as her discreet base. The HOA was both her camouflage and her domain of intimidation. At the same time, we identified a few known criminals in her client list, gleaned from digital records on her computer. The entire ring was more extensive than we'd anticipated. Karen's capture was just the first domino to fall. The ATF prepared to pursue her suppliers and high-level buyers. She might face additional charges if she refused to cooperate. But at the local level, justice was swift for the immediate offenses: possession of unregistered firearms, dealing without a license, trafficking in contraband weapons, and more. Federal prosecutors signaled they would push for maximum penalties, given how brazenly she'd operated in a family neighborhood. Karen's arraignment took place in federal court. A barrage of media coverage ensued, as the public reeled from the bizarre story of a suburban HOA enforcer turned arms trafficker. Cameras flashed, capturing her arrival in prison garb, hands shackled, face drained of color. She glowered at reporters, refusing to answer shouted questions. The prosecution laid out a damning case. They had footage of her showcasing illegal firearms, audio of her admitting to off-the-book sales, and warehouse-level quantities of guns in her garage. Her defense attorney tried to suggest entrapment, that she was goaded by me, but the evidence of repeated shipments and large-scale distribution predated my arrival. The entrapment claim held no weight. Karen's attempts to blame her suppliers or business partners for misleading her fell flat. The judge, unimpressed, denied her bail, citing the danger of flight risk and the threat she posed if free. Karen's property was seized under asset forfeiture laws. Because she used her home to facilitate illegal arms trafficking, she forfeited it to the government as part of the penalty. Neighbors watched with conflicting emotions, shock, anger, and even a twisted sense of relief. The house that once served as a symbol of her tyranny, where she dictated every petty HOA rule, would soon be auctioned off, with proceeds possibly funding law enforcement resources or victim assistance programs. An ironic fate for a property that had hidden a deadly stash of weapons for months on end. In the aftermath, Riverton Estates underwent a quiet transformation. The HOA, under new leadership, loosened its draconian rules. Residents breathed easier, no longer living under Karen's constant scrutiny or the fear of arbitrary fines. The community grew closer, bonded by the surreal experience of witnessing an ATF raid in their own cul-de-sac. Neighbors who once tiptoed around Karen found themselves sharing supportive gestures, helping paint shutters, organizing block parties, or collectively maintaining the shared park. A sense of unity replaced the atmosphere of intimidation. Even Ms. Calloway, once timid about speaking up, felt emboldened to voice her opinions on HOA matters. For me, life returned to a calmer routine. I kept a low profile, continuing my day-to-day tasks for the ATF from a local field office. Some neighbors asked discreetly about my true job, but most respected the boundary that I couldn't discuss details of ongoing investigations. They were simply grateful that someone had halted Karen's criminal enterprise before violence erupted. Occasionally, I'd run into the HOA president, who insisted on thanking me again and again. He felt guilty for enabling Karen's authority, but I assured him that criminals thrive on deception, not his failure. We parted ways with a handshake, each determined to rebuild trust in the neighborhood. Over the next few months, Karen's lawyers negotiated, hoping to reduce her sentence by offering information on her suppliers. A tense back and forth ensued. The U.S. Attorney's Office demanded she reveal the full scope of her operation, how she smuggled arms, who her local accomplices were, and whether any law enforcement officers were complicit. Each new revelation widened the net of suspects. Despite her attempts at cooperation, Karen's fundamental guilt was undeniable. The judge had little sympathy for a suburban arms trafficker endangering families. Several ex-customers testified that she sold them rifles with obliterated serial numbers, making them untraceable. A handful of co-conspirators, caught in the net, admitted that Karen orchestrated the entire distribution plan from her garage, complete with labeling, inventory logs, and hush money to keep certain neighbors from getting curious. Every day of testimony chipped away at Karen's haughty facade. By the final hearing, she appeared weary and resigned. The judge lambasted her callous disregard for community safety and the unthinkable hypocrisy of an HOA officer championing rules while secretly peddling lethal weapons. Then came the sentence, a lengthy federal prison term, decades behind bars. Additionally, the court ordered full forfeiture of her property and any illicit gains. The once pristine house in Riverton Estates would be sold, any leftover funds going to restitution and law enforcement grants. Karen bowed her head as the gavel struck. The humiliating spectacle was over. In the weeks following Karen's final sentencing, news stories recounted how a controlling HOA member turned out to be a major trafficker. Some national outlets even dubbed her the HOA Arms Queen. Late-night talk shows poked fun at the absurdity of a suburban fixture smuggling guns. Locally, folks debated how many times they had passed Karen's house, unaware of the arsenal inside. Yet beneath the sensational headlines lay a serious lesson. Criminals can hide in plain sight. exploiting ordinary structures like HOAs to camouflage illicit activities. Karen's iron grip on community regulations deterred suspicion. Neighbors were too focused on conforming to her petty rules to question her own affairs. The ATF used the case as a model scenario, illustrating how undercover stings can dismantle hidden arms rings. The operation's success also emboldened local law enforcement to take seriously the community's complaints about suspicious behavior. Ms. Calloway was hailed as a quiet hero for voicing her concerns, albeit inadvertently. As for me, I felt relief and vindication. My presence in Riverton Estates had initially been a personal retreat, a place to escape the pressures of my job. But fate thrust me right back into action. While I cherished the sense of accomplishment, I also carried a lingering awareness that criminals lurk in unexpected corners. My neighbors once believed their biggest concern was matching fence paint to HOA standards. Little did they know a far deadlier threat loomed. Summer arrived, bringing warmth and renewal to Riverton Estates. Without Karen's meddling, the HOA blossomed under new leadership. The annual barbecue turned into a heartfelt celebration of community spirit, with laughter replacing the old tension. Families set up bouncy houses, potluck tables stretched across the park, and kids cycled freely without fear of being chastised by an overzealous enforcer. I joined in the festivities, chatting with neighbors who now treated me as a friend rather than a stranger. They asked about my background in law enforcement, though I kept details minimal. All they needed to know was that I was there to help preserve safety when a threat emerged. Across the street, Karen's former home stood empty, waiting for a bank-appointed auction. The curtains remained drawn, the lawn unkempt, an eyesore in a neighborhood priding itself on pristine yards. Yet few residents complained. That abandoned house was a reminder of how close they came to something truly dangerous, and no one was eager to pretend otherwise. Nonetheless, there was a sense of closure in the air. The old repressive order had crumbled, and in its place stood a more genuine community bond. People greeted each other with relief and openness. In a strange twist, Karen's downfall prompted positive changes that might never have occurred otherwise. Behind the scenes, the ATF's inquiry into Karen's network continued. With her ring dismantled, we pursued leads on her suppliers, many operating across state lines. We executed search warrants at warehouses, shipping companies, and even a remote cabin used to store contraband. The puzzle pieces fit together, revealing a sprawling web of arms smuggling that Karen had tapped into. Her digital records indicated she'd been a mid-level distributor, funneling weapons to both local criminals and out-of-state buyers. Some sources suggested she planned to expand, hiring other suburban dwellers to replicate her model. The deeper we dug, the more it seemed we'd thwarted a potential wave of suburban-based arms dealing. That revelation chilled me. If not for Ms. Calloway's curiosity and my own presence, Karen could have built a far larger empire. Still, with her in custody and the ring disrupted, we drastically reduced the flow of illegal guns in the region. The U.S. Attorney praised the operation's success, highlighting it as a blueprint for community-led vigilance. I privately commended the neighbors' willingness to voice concerns, though it took them time to realize the scope of what was happening. As months passed, Riverton Estates returned to a state of near normalcy. The confiscation of Karen's property progressed. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Rumor had it that the bank and the federal government negotiated a short sale. A couple from out of town expressed interest, unaware of the home's dark history, though eventually they learned about the ATF raid and still decided to move forward. When they finally moved in, the community greeted them warmly, eager to leave behind the shadows of Karen's wrongdoing. The new owners repainted the exterior, replaced the garage doors, and planted bright flowers, transforming the once menacing property into a welcoming abode. It was a fitting symbol of renewal. Where firearms were once trafficked, a peaceful family now thrived. Neighborly interactions improved across the board. Without Karen's scolding presence, people were more willing to collaborate, whether on yard maintenance or block parties. The sense of paranoia lifted, replaced by mutual respect. Of course, the HOA still enforced basic rules, but with a gentler approach. Freed from tyranny, Riverton Estates was becoming the wholesome suburb it always aspired to be. Karen appealed her sentence, claiming entrapment and procedural errors. The appellate court rejected her arguments. The evidence was overwhelming. Her own words, the weapons in her garage, her financial records. She was left to serve her prison term in a federal facility known for housing serious offenders, including those convicted of gun-related crimes. Reports trickled out that Karen struggled to adapt to prison life. A woman accustomed to controlling her environment, she found herself powerless behind bars. She reportedly clashed with guards over minor rules, ironically mirroring the same petty enforcement she once practiced against her neighbors. The guards weren't impressed by her attempts to cite regulations from inside her cell. Even if she managed to serve a reduced portion of her sentence, the felony conviction guaranteed that her days of hidden arms dealing were over. No longer would she roam suburban streets with a clipboard, dictating how others should live. That era had ended the moment she reached for a pistol in her garage and found herself face-to-face with federal law enforcement. One bright Sunday morning, as I trimmed hedges in my front yard, the HOA president, Mr. Riley, walked up with a gentle smile. He thanked me again for my role in protecting the neighborhood. "I still feel guilty for letting Karen run roughshod over us," Mr. Riley said softly. "She was so forceful, we all thought we had to follow her every whim." I set down my clippers, nodding. "She exploited everyone's desire to keep the peace. It's not your fault entirely. She was skilled at intimidation." He sighed. "I just hope we never let that happen again." The new board is instituting measures. No single member can impose rules without a majority vote. We're also encouraging neighbors to report concerns early. "Those are good steps," I replied. "In my experience, transparency prevents a lot of abuse." We chatted about the next neighborhood event, a potluck in the park. Mr. Riley said the turnout was expected to be high, a testament to how the community was healing. I offered to bring a dessert. For once, I looked forward to a social gathering. Maybe that was the silver lining. In the wake of Karen's betrayal, the neighbors had grown closer. Despite Karen's downfall, a quiet ripple of fear lingered. If someone like her could hide such a scheme, could it happen again? In response, local law enforcement established a new tip line for suspicious activity. They circulated brochures on recognizing signs of illicit trade. The local police chief even stopped by one of our HOA meetings, reassuring residents that they were increasing patrols. At the same time, some more anxious residents questioned my presence. A few speculated that the ATF had planted me in the community from the start, though I clarified that I'd simply been transferred to a new office and stumbled upon Karen by chance. My track record at the Bureau included multiple undercover stints, but it was pure coincidence that I ended up living down the street from an arms trafficker. Over time, trust was rebuilt. My neighbors realized that if the ATF had truly orchestrated an undercover infiltration from day one, they'd have done so more discreetly. They accepted that life's strange coincidences can place you exactly where you need to be at exactly the right time. Seasons changed, the leaves turned vibrant colors, and Riverton Estates found its new rhythm. I continued my duties at the ATF, but rarely encountered anything so dramatic in my own backyard again. While criminals lurked in many corners of society, our quiet cul-de-sac had faced its hidden danger and prevailed. The block parties returned, bigger and livelier than before. Families joked about the old days when the biggest problem was matching mailbox designs. Now, a sense of perspective reminded everyone that petty HOA squabbles were trivial compared to the threat that had once seethed under their noses. Karen's house, under new ownership, thrived with a family who brought life to its once forbidding walls. Kids played in the yard, and laughter replaced the echo of locked crates. The new owners occasionally asked about the home's history, but mostly they were content to shape their own story. The neighborhood, grateful to close a dark chapter, welcomed them with open arms. As for Karen, she remained behind bars, her property confiscated, her reputation in tatters. Once the self-styled queen of Riverton Estates, she now had no kingdom to rule. No one visited her from the neighborhood. The few who might have felt pity realized her actions nearly jeopardized them all. Her ambition for control had led her down a path of criminal enterprise, culminating in a stark lesson. No amount of suburban authority can shield you from federal law. I sometimes reflect on those intense months. As a Special Operations Commander, I've seen many covert criminals. But Karen taught me that criminals can wear the mask of the overbearing neighbor, using their position to deflect suspicion. The moral, watchful eyes and community vigilance can protect us, even in the most ordinary streets. While I never intended to bring my job home, fate insisted, and in the end, justice prevailed.